Hello and welcome to the program UFO Warning. In this episode, we're talking about a Maine Bigfoot roundup. That's correct, a Maine Bigfoot roundup. We're finding these stories over at bfro.net. That's Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. They do such phenomenal work over there. This first sighting that we're looking at happened in 2020, it says, October 19th, actually. And this is in Penobscot County. Location details, heavily wooded wilderness, miles off Route 2 into the old logging camps. Large property near the end of Cedar Ridge Road, nearest town Greenbush, nearest road Route 2. This experiencer tells us, I was not in any way aware that these creatures existed in Maine, firstly. I am from Connecticut. However, I have spent years in desolate oil fields across the U.S., including places like West Texas, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and the Everglades of Florida. I have a vast knowledge of wildlife, as I have always taken an interest in it and spent years in the forest. My point is, what I experienced this day has shaken me to the core, as I know my encounter was nothing normal. In the north woods of Maine, in a town called Greenbush, population 1,400, I purchased 80 acres of wilderness with virgin forest on the back half of the lot, meaning not even loggers have been there. It's that desolate. I had rented an excavator, and for this entire day I had been cutting a road through swamp hills and forests to a high hill I call Hope Hill, on the most desolate corner of my land where I want to build my cabin. I had made it halfway, and in the swamp I realized I was out of fuel. I shut down the machine and got out. I stepped down onto the road, admiring my work and relishing the idea of pioneering this new path. Suddenly, about 50 yards into the tree line, I heard a bang with a stick on a tree. It sounded like somebody was hitting a wooden bat against a large tree trunk, as the percussion was unmistakable. At first I thought, oh crap, there is a moose, because it is mating season for them and they are known to ram their antlers against trees to intimidate their foes. Suddenly, the sound happened again. Now I was certain this was no moose, as no branches were breaking. There was no movement, no grunts, nothing, just this wooden thump, just through the trees where I couldn't see. I began walking further away because I was obviously freaked out. Again I heard two knocks. I grabbed a large branch I had just ripped down with the machine and smacked it against a large tree trunk. Immediately I received a knock in response. I waited around 45 seconds. I knocked again, and bang, it knocked right back after me again. I knocked again 5 seconds later, and it responded again, right back. Now I was shaking because I knew what I presumed this creature to be. It was obviously strong because the bang was very loud and intimidating. I knew there was a certainty I was interacting with the Sasquatch. I went back to my trailer on my quad, which was parked about 200 feet down the trail. I flew home. I calmed down. Now I was questioning reality, and was quite scared, I guess. This is my land. I'm only halfway through making the road. These were my thoughts, so I decided to ride back. I knocked again. It responded. I took my phone out, turned on the video recording, knocked, and it went away, almost as if it knew I was recording. Regardless, it was incredibly perplexing. I got back on the quad and went back home, knowing for sure what I just experienced was legitimate. I had bought a feather bead string thing from a dream catcher and brought it out there as a gift. It's been there 3 days. I haven't gone back to see if it's still there. It says also noticed none of the witnesses myself. Other stories, no. Time and conditions around 4 p.m. in light, dry, and clear conditions. Environment, pine forest near lowland swamps and streams that connect the Penobscot River via Broombridge Brook. What an amazing sighting. I mean, it sounds like this guy's out there trying to homestead some ground, and this Bigfoot has already been there. He's like saying, hey, this is my place. What are you doing? To talk about the investigator here, it says the follow-up investigation report by BFRO investigator Matthew Moneymaker. I spoke with the witness. He is very credible. The relevant details are contained in his report. The sounds could only have been Sasquatch wood knocks. He will contact us if he hears or sees anything else. And then it tells us a little bit about the investigator, Matthew Moneymaker. Very, very cool sighting. Let's go on and take a look at this next one here from Maine. This next sighting occurred, looks like November 12th, 2020 in Hancock County. It says that the nearest town is Osborne. Now, I looked this town up, population 65. Looks like it's about a third of the way between Bangor, Maine and the coast, so up there in the kind of the northeast central part of the state. It says location details, Spectacle Pond west of Kingman Brook. If we look to see what the experiencer had to say, they tell us that I have spent a large part of my life in the woods between Eddington, where I grew up, and DeBlois, where my grandfather built a hunting and fishing camp in the 1920s. I have been everywhere in between, hunting, fishing, camping, and hiking. I have walked those woods since I was 4 years old, and I am now 61. I know the deer, moose, bear, and other wildlife of those woods. I built my camp on Spectacle Pond in Osborne in 1988. Over the years, I have spent a lot of time exploring the woods and waters around the camp and know the area between Route 179 and Route 193 better than most, and within 10 miles of my camp better than anyone. Since 2008, when I retired from the U.S. Navy, I have spent 1 month every year at my camp, between 2 weeks in May fishing and 2 weeks in November hunting. I have spent many days and nights in the most remote areas of that part of Maine. On the evening of November 12th, 2020, my wife and I had returned to our camp after an afternoon deer hunt. It was dark by the time we got back to camp, and I settled in for a routine evening of warming up the camp, supper, a couple of hands of cribbage, and talking. We had been at camp for 10 days. At around 8:30, my wife decided to go to bed as we planned to hunt the next morning. I picked up my book and was reading until 10:30. The only light within half a mile of my camp was a single gas light in the front room, which I was using to read. The nearest people were half a mile away in their camp, back toward Route 9. I decided to call it a night at 10:30 and wanted to relieve myself before going to bed, so I went outside across the porch, down the front steps, and walked approximately 15 feet to the back outside corner of the camp. Within seconds of standing in that spot, there were two very loud thwack sounds just inside the wood line, which is 15 yards across the backyard. It took me by surprise, as I've never heard that sound before, completely by myself in the woods. It sounded identical to someone taking a large stick of firewood and hitting a tree in full swing. I could easily replicate that noise by knocking snow or ice off firewood against a tree, but with force. I did not have a flashlight with me, as the diffused light from the gas light inside the camp gave me enough point of reference to get back inside, so I didn't think to bring one. I stood there perplexed as to what I had just heard and tried to make sense of it when it happened again. Thwack, but this time a little further away, maybe 25 to 30 yards, but still quite loud. This repeated itself 10 or 11 times over a period of maybe 2 to 3 minutes, each time a little more distance than before. I remained standing there, still trying to figure out what was thwacking these trees. After the hitting of trees dissipated, I returned to the camp and locked the door. I didn't and still don't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't a person, moose, deer, or bear. Of course, there was absolutely no light, as in a flashlight, from a person. Additionally, those woods are extremely thick with dead spruce and fir, lots of blowdowns. Yet there was absolutely no noise, no snapping branches, no breaking twigs, nothing. Silence. I can tell you firsthand that nobody could walk down through there in broad daylight, much less at night, without a flashlight, without snapping branches and making a lot of noise. I spent an additional hour in the camp that night, reflecting on what I had heard and trying to attribute it to something that made sense. There was none in all of my experience. I went to bed, and when we got up Friday morning, we decided to hang out at camp to get a start on packing and cleaning, as we were closing up camp and leaving on Saturday. I walked into the woods during daylight where I had heard the thwack noises the night before, but found nothing, where I expected to see some type of sign. Needless to say, I didn't tell my wife about those experiences until Saturday morning as we were getting ready to leave. I still have no idea what it was. It was so dark, I didn't see anything, but I can tell you that I've never heard or experienced anything like that in the many years that I've spent in those woods and the 30 plus years I've owned that camp. Wow, Says there's no other witnesses, other stories. He says, I questioned one other longtime woodsman from the area. He had never experienced anything like that. His camp is a little over a mile from mine. Tells us it was at 10:30 at night, complete overcast, no stars, no moon, pitch black, low 40s, no wind, rain, or snow. Says my environment, my backyard, thick woods, lots of small dead spruce and fir with blowdowns and mixed forest, 3 uninhabited other camps nearby, but not in visual sight. So this is really a pretty remote area. Guy's been going here all these years, it says, and for the first time he has this experience, this wood knocking. I mean, clearly to me these things are trying to intimidate people somehow, I think. I don't look at this as a situation where these entities or whatever they are reaching out to communicate with people. To me, it just means get off of my property, kind of get out of my yard. Let's take a look at a couple more here. We'll do this one and one more. Now, this here encounter said happened in 1996 or 1997 in Maine in Hancock County, nearest town Bucksport, nearest road 46. Now, this looks to me on the map like it's down south of Bangor, maybe getting pretty close to the coastline down there. The experiencer tells us, my sister and I were driving to school one morning a few years ago, and straight up ahead we both saw something standing there in the road on 2 feet, staring at us as we approached. As we got closer, we could tell that the creature was about the size of a human, was covered with dark, shaggy hair, and was sort of hunched over with its arms hanging down quite far. It just stood there about a foot or two into the road watching us, and then almost as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into the trees. When we drove by, I looked into the forest to see if I could see anything, but I couldn't. We went to school, told a few friends, and then told our parents later that night. We didn't think to call the police or anything at the time, although I wish we had. When we tell people, they never believe us because most people don't even believe in Bigfoot. I'm glad that this site is here so that someone might finally believe us. I know what we saw was real, and I know it wasn't a bear. Bears are not shaped like humans and very rarely walk around on 2 feet. It says the witnesses, it was just me and my sister, and we were headed to school. As far as other stories go, it says, I thought I should tell you about this, even though it might have been nothing. I was driving with my dad in Orrington, Maine, and as we passed a road, I saw something crossing it. I couldn't tell what it was because we went past so quickly, but what I saw was very dark and tall. It is possible that it just could have been a bear, but it would have had to have been up on 2 feet. I made my dad turn around, and we went up the road driving very slowly, looking into the woods along the sides of the road. We didn't see anything. Whatever it was had vanished. But now, as I think back, comparing that incident with the other that I had in Bucksport, what I saw in Orrington, although only for a second, seemed very similar to each other. I'm not saying that I know or even think it was a Bigfoot in Orrington that day, but I do think that it certainly looked like the one I saw in Bucksport. I didn't think much about that incident and had almost forgotten about it because I never had an explanation for it and because I was the only one who saw it, so I had nobody to discuss it with. It says, as far as the terms, time, and conditions, it was during the school year, so it wasn't summer, and there was no snow, so I don't think it was winter. It was either fall or spring. The environment on a road with a lot of forest near White's apple orchard. I think it's interesting to note that this thing could have been near an apple orchard. We've often read stories or heard stories about how these things like apples, how they take apples for bait, how they've been known to eat apples off apple trees. A great form of food for these things, even if it might not be a naturally occurring species that's been around for thousands of years in their environment. It's something that they seem to welcome. Now let's take a look at this last Bigfoot sighting here before we wrap up this episode. Now, this next encounter is a little further west from Greenbush we just talked about. This is in Greenwood, Maine, near there it says, which would be the east central part of the state as opposed to more of the southeast central part of the state. Both these look like they're pretty much rural areas. It says it happened in August of 2022. The state of course, Maine County, Oxford County, location details, all incidents occurred while fishing Overset Pond in Greenwood, Maine. Tells us here the nearest town, Greenwood, Patch Mountain Road. If we look at what the experiencer had to say, they tell us during the spring and summer of 2022, I discovered a new favorite remote trout pond not far from my camp. This pond is roughly 1 mile hike to access. Hiking trails are present, however. In the roughly 20 plus times I visited this pond, I saw a total of 5 other people, 2 pairs of hikers and 1 other lone fisherman. This pond is notorious for wind, so I would only visit it on calm days. The more I visited the pond, the more I noticed odd occurrences. I had never heard a tree fall in the woods until I started going there. During my visits to this pond, I heard 5 tree falls, although it should be noted that I saw none of them. In addition to this, I heard an innumerable number of tree knocks during my visits. My first visits here started in April and ended in August. The activity grew greater as the summer progressed. I noted how odd the coincidence of the tree falls was, but thought nothing of it until one of my final visits. The peak of activity was during this visit in mid-August, where I heard 2 trees fall. This piqued my attention away from fishing and onto what was going on around me. I noticed on this trip that every time I paddled to the north end of the pond, I was met with tree knocks. This continued until I noticed the midsection of a birch tree leaned up against another tree on the water's edge. I had paddled up and down the pond at least 100 times over the course of the spring and summer, and I had only now noticed a birch tree. I felt as though it had been placed there while I was on the south side of the pond. As I was examining the tree from my canoe, I again heard tree knocks. I then paddled back to the south end and fished there until light began to fade and got ready to hike out. Near the pond, large rocks block the trail to ensure no ATVs can drive directly to the pond. On these rocks sat a perfectly intact birch tree skin. I am not convinced a person couldn't have done these things. However, given the proximity of my experiences to another sighting on this website, I felt I should report them. I never had any weird occurrences while hiking in, out, or around the pond, only when I was on the pond fishing. Also noticed, I had an odd bear encounter. The bear was small and just stood on all fours in the middle of the trail. This was odd because not only are bears rare in this area, but I was also making noise specifically to keep any bears away. It was just weird behavior from the bear. There were no other witnesses, just me. I have a photo of the birch tree skin. And yes, I read about a sighting on this website that occurred in 2020, very close to here. It gives the time and condition as daytime, afternoon, clear sky, low wind, and the environment is thick forest to the west, small swampy areas on both the north and south sides of the pond that turn rapidly to thick forest. The east edge is blocked by a giant 500-foot cliff face and boulder field. Boy, it sounds really remote. Very cool sighting. So it's almost as if this guy is back there fishing this secluded pond, and maybe this Bigfoot or Bigfoot family or whatever continues this to be their property. Another case where they seem to be warning this guy off. This last sighting is dated December 18th, 2023. Location, county, Aroostook County, it says, up there in Maine. The residents do not want us to post their address or use their last names. The property is 2.5 miles south of Mars Hill, Maine, and 3.5 miles west of the Canadian border. So you're looking up there in the northeast part of Maine. It says nearest town, Blaine. Nearest road, Robinson Road. Now, if we go over here and see what the Observer has to say, it says December 18th, 2023, a big storm blew in around 7 a.m. and didn't move off until about 12:20 a.m. That's quite a storm. It knocked out power to our home sometime around 7 p.m. We have a chicken coop about 40 feet from our house. It is 2 feet off the ground and 12 by 20 with an entrance door that used to be the front door to our home. It was about 8:30 p.m. Sunset is around 3:30 this time of year. When I was shining my flashlight out an upstairs window and saw a dark silhouette standing in front of my coop, the top of its head was in line with the top of the coop door. It was very muscular with broad shoulders, long upper legs, and proportionately shorter lower legs. It was too narrow at the hips to be a bear. We had a black bear and her cubs den near our house a few years ago, and this was nothing like her shape. I moved the flashlight to try to get a better look, and it disappeared from view. The chicken coop is covered in white siding. There is no mistake that this was bipedal. It was facing me when I shined the light on it. it turned to run off just before I moved the flashlight. Given that an average door is about 7 feet high and the coop is 2 feet off the ground, that would put it at around 9 feet tall. What had me looking outside was a sound that I'd heard on the wind that alarmed me to my core. I had spent the day listening to the wind howl and moan, but this was different. It was a guttural sound and within the sounds of the wind, but not in sync. It caused a physical reaction. My heart started racing and my stomach went into knots. I was tending 2 of my grandkids who were playing with flashlights, mostly making shadow puppets. I jumped to my feet and told them to hand me a flashlight and turn the other one off, to shine the flashlight outside through the window. I must put it against the window or it just reflects back, so to see out the window, all the other lights must be turned off. One of our dogs was barking furiously. Before I could tell my daughters what I saw, they told me what they were experiencing downstairs with the 2 younger children and the dogs because the power was out. My youngest daughter was charging her phone in her car. She said that she went out to get her phone off the charger and felt like somebody was watching her. The feeling was so intense that she stayed in her car for a few minutes to look around and see if she could see anyone. When she got out to head back into the house, she only got a few steps away from the car when she heard the same sound I had heard. She said she was instantly terrified and ran into the house. The dog was in the window, barking as she was coming through the door. My oldest daughter said that when she heard the howl, she saw her dog lift her head and look out the window, then stand up and start barking frantically. The dog was looking in the opposite direction from my youngest daughter, who had just started to run out the front door. Nobody wanted to charge their phones in the vehicles after that. This was not a case of mistaken identity about the sounds. We were in 30-mile-per-hour winds with 55-mile-per-hour gusts and a downpour of rain in December. I don't know of any animal, domestic or wild, that would be out in that weather. In the morning, after sunrise, my oldest daughter went out to the trash bin that is next to the chicken coop. She found the heavy lid was lifted off the bin and set on the back of the bin opposite the direction of the wind that had been blowing. 2 large bags of trash were missing, and there was a trail of trash into the woods. Critters tear up the trash in the bin and pick up what they want. They do not carry 55-gallon trash bags home with them. There are no tracks of any kind because we don't have any soft mud spots. It was either gravel or grass around the entire area of our property. Wow. Said they also noticed throughout the summer I heard odd chirping sounds after dark, which were identified as a mountain lion. Other witnesses, there were 3 adults, 3 kids, 1 of 3 dogs, a Doberman, power outage, children playing shadow puppets with flashlights before bedtime. Other stories? No, but we don't know many people. It says the time it happened, 8:30 p.m. during a massive storm, high winds and downpour, very dark. And the environment was wooded and farmland combined, rural Maine, Triple Creek Ski Resort, hills, ponds, and potato farms. That must have been a really intense experience. I mean, you've got this storm, the power's out, it's December. Now, I'd say it's pouring down rain, but I imagine it's still pretty chilly. And then you're hearing these crazy, wild sounds that you can't identify outside your window. And it's not just you hearing them, even the dog can hear them. So yeah, what an incredible sighting there. The investigator on this one did apparently look into this. It says, note from BFRO investigator Matt Moneymaker, there are a few elements about this report that suggest an attempt to make contact and seek assistance from humans during a weather event. These situations most often happen on properties where any prowling animal in the nearby woods would frequently hear and observe human females interacting with domesticated animals in an affectionate way, as opposed to unaffectionate treatment of commercial livestock. We talked about this a few times on the TV show. The geology around there has big granite protrusions, but is not karst, i.e. limestone caves. The soil is too rocky to dig a man-sized burrow by hand, nor are there deep rocky gorges that would provide natural protection from the harshest winter winds. The only shelter from any wind in this particular area is thick brush among thick stands of tree. Thick brush provides sufficient protection from winter or cold-adapted mammals if the wind is not too strong. Certain types of trees, especially types of cedar and dense thickets, create umbrellas from snow. At the base, there are dry dust piles to get inside, like small hay piles, if you are right next to the base of the tree, especially big, thick cedar trees. Unless there is a very large and very dense, mature cedar thicket nearby, then very strong freezing winds will penetrate the thickest trees and brush at hand. It would be uncomfortable enough to make a large animal want to move around to keep warm. This Sasquatch was probably taking chickens and turkeys from the family's chicken coop over time. That poultry would have been a fallback energy source if high-calorie food was needed desperately, like in this particular freezing wind scenario. The Sasquatch may also have been trying to get the attention of the people inside the house, mostly females and children. That is a typical pattern. The Sasquatch would have known that these women are helping other animals through the storm, and thus might be sympathetic to another creature caught in the storm, help with shelter or perhaps with food. That happens with various types of mammals and are in similar circumstances. If there had been a barn or shed where the Sasquatch could have taken refuge, it probably would have done so during that storm. A repeated observation in the Midwestern U.S. is Sasquatch tracks in snow leaving a barn after a bad winter storm. Even if this family had perceived that the Sasquatch was seeking help to get through the storm, the family may not have had the option to open a shelter space like a garage, which would be an instant cave, say, that would provide temporary refuge from the howling winds. Many types of mammals and birds will seek shelter spaces in circumstances, even if it is close to human dwellings. They will take the chance. With dogs in a house, it would not have worked to let the Sasquatch inside by letting it see they are opening the door to let it come in. This situation, and the accommodating humans would open the door and retire to the upstairs to allow the animal to step inside out of the freezing wind, so it would not have to confront a human while inside. That is a sort of interaction with the Sasquatch that may occur in the future once people realize that these are very intelligent creatures that do not prey on humans. Now, that's an interesting take. It goes on and comments a little bit further. Has a close-up on the map here. Yeah, you can see there's some intensive farming around this, but there's also stands of trees. So this could be a situation where maybe these things are roaming at, and like the investigator said, they just can't find a place to find adequate shelter from the storm at. I don't know. Very cool sighting nonetheless. Just imagine being there in that storm and then hearing these noises of what appears to be a very desperate creature. Overall, some really nice sightings out of Maine. Thank you to the people that put those in there for us. Until next time, this is UFO Warning. Over and out.